The blade of the knife bit into the bark of the ancient oak tree that stood at the edge of the creek, and Henry James felt his heart hammering in his chest as he carved the final letter of her name into the weathered wood. It was 1877, and the Nevada Territory sun beat down mercilessly on his back, but he didn't care about the heat or the sweat dripping down his forehead as he stepped back to admire his handiwork. Willow Reed. He had carved it deep enough that it would last through seasons of rain and wind, through the harsh desert winters and blazing summers. She probably didn't even know he existed, but that didn't stop him from thinking about her every moment of every day. Henry was 24 years old, tall and lean from years of working cattle ranches across the West. His father had died when he was 16, leaving him with nothing but a horse, a rifle, and the clothes on his back. He had worked his way from ranch to ranch, learning the trade, saving every penny he could. Now he was working at the Double R Ranch just outside Lovelock, Nevada, a small town that had sprung up along the Humboldt River. It wasn't much, but it was honest work, and it paid enough that he could afford to dream about having his own place someday. Willow Reed was the daughter of Samuel Reed, who owned the general store in town. Henry had first seen her 3 months ago when he rode into Lovelock to pick up supplies for the ranch. She had been standing on the porch of the store, arranging sacks of flour, her auburn hair catching the afternoon light like fire. He had nearly fallen off his horse. She was 21 years old, with green eyes that seemed to see right through a man's soul, and a smile that could light up the darkest night. He had managed to stammer out his order, feeling like a complete fool, while she had been nothing but kind and patient with him. Since that day, he had found every excuse to ride into town. He needed nails. He needed coffee. He needed to check if a package had arrived. The other ranch hands had started teasing him about it, but he didn't care. Each time he saw her, he tried to work up the courage to say something more than just pleasantries about the weather or the quality of the rope she was selling him. But the words never came. How could he tell a woman like that what he felt? He was just a cowboy with nothing to his name, and she was the daughter of one of the most respected businessmen in town. So instead, he had carved her name into this tree, this old oak that stood by the creek where he sometimes came to think. It was about a mile outside of town, on a piece of land that didn't belong to anyone in particular. The tree had probably been there for 100 years or more, its branches spreading wide to provide shade from the brutal Nevada sun. He pressed his palm against the carving, feeling the rough edges of the letters. It was a foolish gesture, he knew, but it made him feel like he had done something, made some kind of declaration, even if she would never see it. He mounted his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, and headed back toward the ranch. The sun was starting to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The landscape around Lovelock was harsh but beautiful in its own way, with sagebrush stretching as far as the eye could see, broken up by occasional stands of cottonwoods along the river. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding on to the last of the winter snow even though it was June. The Double R Ranch was run by Robert Richardson, a gruff but fair man in his 50s who had built his spread from nothing over the past 20 years. Henry had been working there for 8 months now, and Richardson had told him just last week that he was one of the best hands he had ever had. The compliment had meant a lot, but it also made Henry think about his future. He couldn't be a ranch hand forever. He wanted his own land, his own cattle, his own life. And if he was being honest with himself, he wanted to be able to offer something to a woman like Willow Reed. When he got back to the ranch, the other hands were already gathered around the bunkhouse, cleaning up for supper. There were 5 of them in total, ranging in age from 19 to 45. They were a good crew, hard-working and mostly decent men, though they liked to give each other a hard time the way cowboys always did. "You been to that tree again?" asked Tommy Blake, a young hand with a gap-toothed grin. "The one where you go to pine after Miss Reed?" Henry felt his face flush. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't," said Marcus Hill, an older cowboy with a gray-streaked beard. "You got that same lovesick look you always get when you come back from town." "Leave him alone," said Charlie Winters, the oldest of the group. "We all been young and foolish once." Henry tried to ignore them as he unsaddled Copper and brushed him down, making sure the horse had water and feed. The ribbing was good-natured, but it still stung a little because they were right. He was lovesick, and he didn't know what to do about it. That night, he lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling, thinking about the carving in the tree. It had been an impulsive thing, maybe even a stupid thing. But it had also felt right, like he was making a promise to himself. Someday, he told himself, someday he would find the courage to tell her how he felt. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Richardson wanted them to move a herd of cattle to the northern pasture, which meant a long day in the saddle. Henry welcomed the hard work. It kept his mind occupied and his body too tired to overthink things. They worked through the heat of the day, pushing the stubborn beasts through sagebrush and around rocky outcroppings, eating dust and drinking warm water from their canteens. It was late afternoon when Richardson rode up alongside Henry. "You're good with those cattle," he said. "Got a natural way with them." "Thank you, sir," Henry replied. Richardson studied him for a moment. "I've been thinking. I'm not getting any younger and I've been wanting to expand the operation. How would you feel about taking on more responsibility around here? Maybe even becoming my foreman eventually?" Henry was stunned. "I'd be honored, Mr. Richardson." "You've earned it," Richardson said. "You're reliable, you work hard, and the other men respect you. Think about it. We can talk details later." As Richardson rode off to check on the other hands, Henry felt a surge of hope. Foreman was a real position with real pay. It was the kind of job that could give a man a future. The kind of job that might make him worthy of courting someone like Willow Reed. The thought sustained him through the rest of the day's work. By the time they got the cattle settled in the new pasture and made it back to the ranch, the sun was setting again, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Henry was exhausted, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that came from honest labor. Over the next few weeks, Henry threw himself into his work with renewed energy. He wanted to prove to Richardson that his faith was well placed. He wanted to save every penny he could. And in the back of his mind, he kept thinking about that carving in the tree, about Willow's name etched into the bark. It was early July when he rode into town again, this time with a legitimate list of supplies that Richardson needed. The heat was oppressive, the kind that made mirages shimmer on the horizon and turned the main street of Lovelock into a dusty furnace. But when Henry walked into Reed's general store, it felt cooler, the thick adobe walls keeping out the worst of the heat. Willow was behind the counter and she looked up when the door opened. Her face broke into a smile that made Henry's heart skip a beat. "Good afternoon, Mr. James," she said. "What can I help you with today?" He handed her the list, trying not to stare at the way the light from the window caught in her hair. "Just these supplies, Miss Reed, for the ranch." She looked over the list, her brow furrowing slightly in concentration. "I have most of this in stock. The wire might take a few days to come in." "Would that be all right?" "That's fine," he said. "We're not in a terrible hurry." She began gathering items from the shelves, and Henry found himself watching her move around the store with an easy grace. She was wearing a simple blue dress, practical but becoming, and he noticed that she had small calluses on her hands from handling all the merchandise. She wasn't some pampered town girl. She worked hard, just like he did. "How are things out at the Double R?" she asked as she set a box of nails on the counter. "Good," he said. "Mr. Richardson is talking about making me foreman." Her eyes lit up. "That's wonderful. You must be very proud." "I'm grateful for the opportunity," he said, then hesitated. "Miss Reed, I was wondering if maybe someday you might like to take a walk with me. Just around town, nothing fancy." He held his breath, waiting for her response. She looked at him for a long moment, and he couldn't quite read the expression on her face. Then she said, "I would like that, Mr. James, but I should warn you that my father is very protective." "I understand," Henry said, his heart soaring. "I would never do anything to disrespect you or your family." "I know," she said softly. "That's why I said yes." They arranged to meet the following Sunday afternoon after church. Henry left the store feeling like he was walking on air. He had actually done it. He had asked her, and she had said yes. The whole ride back to the ranch, he couldn't stop grinning. The other hands noticed immediately. "What's got you so happy?" Tommy asked. "Miss Reed agreed to take a walk with me," Henry admitted. There were hoots and hollers from the others, along with some good-natured teasing, but Henry didn't care. He had a chance, a real chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. Sunday seemed to take forever to arrive. Henry spent Saturday evening cleaning his best shirt and pants, polishing his boots until they shone, and trimming his hair and beard as neatly as he could manage. The other hands watched his preparations with amusement, but they also helped, with Marcus lending him a proper hat and Charlie giving him advice about how to behave like a gentleman. "Don't talk too much," Charlie said. "Let her do most of the talking. Women like a man who listens." "But don't be silent like a stone," Marcus added. "Ask her questions. Show you're interested in what she has to say." Henry absorbed all the advice, feeling nervous and excited in equal measure. He barely slept that night, and when Sunday morning came, he was up before dawn. He rode into town early, attended the service at the small church on the edge of town, and then waited outside, his hat in his hands, watching for Willow. She emerged from the church with her father, a stern-looking man with gray hair and a prominent mustache. Samuel Reed's eyes narrowed when he saw Henry waiting, but Willow touched her father's arm and said something Henry couldn't hear. After a moment, Reed nodded stiffly and walked away, though not before giving Henry a look that clearly said he would be watching. Willow walked over to Henry, and he thought she looked even more beautiful than usual in her Sunday dress, which was a deep green that matched her eyes. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning, Miss Reed," he replied. "You look lovely." She blushed slightly. "Thank you. Shall we walk?" They strolled down the main street of Lovelock, keeping a respectable distance between them, but Henry was acutely aware of her presence beside him. The town was quiet on Sunday afternoon, most people resting at home after church. They walked past the saloon, which was closed, past the blacksmith shop and the small hotel, and toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. James," Willow said. "Where are you from originally?" "Kansas," he said. "A little town you've probably never heard of. My father was a farmer, but he died when I was young. After that, I worked on various ranches, moving west. I've been in Nevada for about 2 years now." "That must have been hard, losing your father so young," she said, her voice full of sympathy. "It was," he admitted, "but it taught me to stand on my own 2 feet. What about you? Have you always lived in Lovelock?" "Not always," she said. "My family came here from Missouri when I was 15. My father wanted to start fresh out west. The store has done well, and I'm glad we came. I love the wide open spaces, even if the summers are brutally hot." They talked as they walked, and Henry found that conversation came more easily than he had expected. Willow was intelligent and curious, asking him about his work, about the places he had been, about his dreams for the future. He found himself telling her things he had never told anyone, about how he wanted his own ranch someday, about how he loved working with cattle and horses, about how he sometimes felt small under the vast Nevada sky, but also free in a way he had never felt back in Kansas. "I think I understand that," Willow said. "There's something about this land that makes you feel like anything is possible." They had wandered out of town without really thinking about it, following a path along the river. The Humboldt was low this time of year, but there were still cottonwoods growing along its banks, providing welcome shade. Henry saw that they were heading in the direction of the old oak tree, and his stomach tightened. The carving. He had almost forgotten about it. Where does this path lead? Willow asked. "There's an old oak tree up ahead," Henry said, his mouth suddenly dry. "It's a nice spot, but we don't have to go that far if you're tired." "I'm not tired at all," she said. "Let's see this tree." They walked on, and soon the massive oak came into view. It was just as Henry remembered it, its broad branches spreading wide, its trunk thick and gnarled with age. Willow made a sound of delight. "Oh, it's beautiful. I didn't know this was here." "Not many people come out this way," Henry said, feeling his pulse quicken. The carving was on the side facing the creek. Would she see it? Willow walked around the tree, running her hand along the bark. "It must be so old," she said. "I wonder how many years it's been here, watching over this land." And then she stopped. She had found it. Henry watched as she traced the letters with her fingers, spelling out her own name. "Willow Reed," she read aloud. Then she turned to look at him, her eyes wide. "You did this," he couldn't lie. "Yes," he said. "A few weeks ago. I'm sorry if it offends you. I just couldn't stop thinking about you, and I wanted to do something, even if it was foolish." She stared at him for a long moment, and Henry felt like his whole future hung in the balance. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. "I've been waiting," she said softly. "Waiting." He repeated, not sure he understood. "For someone like you," she said. "Someone genuine. Someone who sees me as more than just the storekeeper's daughter. Someone who would carve my name into a tree just because he was thinking about me." She stepped closer to him. "I've been watching you too, you know. Every time you came into the store, always so polite, always so kind. I hoped you would ask to walk with me, but I wasn't sure if you ever would." Henry felt like his heart might burst. "I was afraid you would think I wasn't good enough for you." "Good enough." She laughed, a warm sound that seemed to fit perfectly in this place. "Henry, you're one of the most decent men I've ever met. I don't care that you're a ranch hand. I can see what's in your heart." He reached out and took her hand, feeling the calluses on her fingers, the strength in her grip. "Willow," he said, using her first name for the first time, "I know this is only our first walk, and I know I need to prove myself to your father, but I want you to know that my intentions are serious. I care about you more than I can say." "I know," she said, squeezing his hand. "And I want you to know that I feel the same way." They stood there under the old oak tree, hands clasped, looking into each other's eyes. Henry knew that this was a moment he would remember for the rest of his life, the moment when everything changed. The harsh Nevada sun beat down on the land around them, but here in the shade of the oak, with Willow's hand in his, everything felt perfect. They stayed at the tree for a while longer, talking and laughing, before finally walking back to town. Henry returned her to her father's store, tipping his hat respectfully to Samuel Reed, who was waiting on the porch with his arms crossed. But even Reed's stern expression couldn't dampen Henry's spirits. Over the following weeks, Henry and Willow saw each other whenever they could. He rode into town every Sunday after church, and they would walk together, sometimes along the river, sometimes just around town, always with a chaperone at a discreet distance as propriety demanded. But Henry didn't mind. Just being near her was enough. He also met with Samuel Reed, asking permission to court his daughter formally. Reed had grilled him about his prospects, his character, his intentions. Henry had answered honestly, telling Reed about his promotion to foreman, about his savings, about his dream of one day owning his own ranch. Reed had listened without expression, then finally said, "My daughter seems to think highly of you. I'll allow the courtship, but I expect you to treat her with the utmost respect." "You have my word, sir," Henry had said. As summer turned to fall, Henry and Willow's relationship deepened. They talked about everything under the sun, learning each other's hopes and dreams, fears and failures. Willow told him about her mother, who had died when she was young, and how she had learned to run the store by her father's side. She told him about her love of reading, how she ordered books from back east whenever she could afford them, and how she dreamed of one day having a house with a proper library. Henry told her about the loneliness of his early years, drifting from ranch to ranch, never really belonging anywhere. He told her about his love of the land, how he felt most at peace when he was riding under the open sky, working with the cattle. He told her that he had never imagined he could feel this way about another person, that being with her made him feel complete in a way he had never felt before. By October, everyone in Lovelock knew that Henry James and Willow Reed were courting. The other ranch hands teased him mercilessly, but it was all in good fun. Richardson had officially made him foreman, which came with a significant raise in pay. Henry had started looking at land for sale, talking to the bank about what it would take to get a loan for his own place. One cool evening in late October, Henry and Willow were walking along the river, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. The cottonwoods had turned yellow, their leaves rustling in the breeze. Henry felt like the moment was right. He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Willow," he said, taking both her hands in his, "these past few months have been the happiest of my life. You've made me believe in things I never thought possible. I know I'm not a wealthy man, and I know I still have a lot to prove, but I love you with everything in me. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Henry, I will marry you." He pulled her close, holding her tight, feeling her heart beating against his chest. "I promise I'll spend the rest of my life making you happy," he said. "You already do," she whispered. They were married in December in the small church in Lovelock. It was a simple ceremony, but it was perfect. Willow wore a white dress that her father had ordered special from San Francisco, and Henry wore a new suit that he had saved up for months to buy. The church was full of people from town and the ranch hands from the Double R. Even Richardson came, which meant a lot to Henry. Samuel Reed walked his daughter down the aisle, and though his face was stern as always, Henry saw tears in the older man's eyes when he placed Willow's hand in Henry's. "Take care of her," Reed said quietly. "I will, sir," Henry promised. "Always." The preacher spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and bad. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Henry kissed Willow for the first time, and the church erupted in cheers and applause. They held a reception at the hotel, with food and music and dancing. Henry had never been much of a dancer, but Willow taught him, laughing as he stepped on her toes, but never complaining. They danced until late into the night, surrounded by friends and well-wishers. Richardson had given them a wedding present that left Henry speechless. A small piece of land adjacent to the Double R Ranch, along with 10 head of cattle to start their own herd. "You've earned it," Richardson had said, "and I'm not getting any younger. I figure having you nearby will be good for both of us." Samuel Reed's gift was equally generous. He had secretly been saving money for years, and he gave them enough to start building a small house on their new land. "I know I've been hard on you, James," Reed said gruffly. But you've proven yourself. You make my daughter happy, and that's all that matters." Henry and Willow spent their wedding night in a room at the hotel, but the next day they went to look at their land. It was about a mile from the old oak tree where Henry had carved Willow's name, on a gentle slope that overlooked the river. The view stretched for miles in every direction, with the mountains rising in the distance. "We could build the house right here," Willow said, standing at the highest point of the property. "We would be able to see the sunrise every morning." "And the sunset every evening," Henry added, standing behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "It's perfect." They moved into a small cabin on the Double R Ranch temporarily while their house was being built. Henry continued working as foreman, but now he was also building his own operation. He worked long days, splitting his time between Richardson's cattle and his own small herd. Willow continued helping her father at the store during the day, but every evening she and Henry would ride out to their land to check on the progress of the house. The builder was a skilled craftsman named George Murphy, who had come to Nevada from Oregon. He worked with a small crew, and they made steady progress through the winter months. The house was going to be modest but comfortable, with 2 bedrooms, a parlor, a kitchen, and a wide front porch where they could sit and watch the sunset. Willow had designed it herself, working with Murphy to make sure every detail was just right. By March of 1878, the house was nearly complete. Henry and Willow walked through it one evening, looking at the rooms that would soon be their home. The wooden floors still smelled of fresh cut pine, and the walls were smooth and white. In the parlor, there was space for the shelves that would hold Willow's books. In the kitchen, there was a brand new cast iron stove that Samuel Reed had ordered special. "It's really ours," Willow said, looking around in wonder. "Our own home." "It's just the beginning," Henry said. "Someday we'll have a ranch that rivals the Double R. We'll have the biggest herd in the county." "I don't care about having the biggest herd," Willow said, turning to look at him. "I just want to build a life with you. Everything else is just details." They moved into the house in April, and Henry thought he had never seen Willow happier than when she was arranging their furniture, hanging curtains, placing her books on the shelves. She made the house feel like a home, filling it with warmth and love. Henry threw himself into building their ranch. He bought more cattle when he could afford them, gradually growing his herd. He hired a young hand named David Foster to help with the work, a kid of 19 who reminded Henry of himself a few years back. Henry taught him everything he knew, and David proved to be a hard worker and a quick learner. Willow continued working at her father's store part-time, but she also took on the bookkeeping for their ranch, keeping meticulous records of every expense and every head of cattle. She was better with numbers than Henry, and he trusted her judgment completely. Life fell into a comfortable rhythm. Henry would wake before dawn, kiss Willow goodbye, and head out to work with the cattle. He would come home at sunset, tired and dusty, and Willow would have dinner waiting. They would eat together, talking about their day, making plans for the future. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the stars come out, holding hands and feeling grateful for everything they had built together. In July, Willow told him she was expecting their first child. Henry was so overcome with emotion that he couldn't speak for a moment. He just held her, feeling her tears of joy soaking into his shirt, feeling his own tears running down his face. "We're going to have a baby," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "We're going to be parents." "I can't believe it," he said. "I mean, I can believe it. I just never thought I could be this happy." They told Samuel Reed that same day, and the stern old man actually smiled, pulling his daughter into a rare embrace. "You're going to be a wonderful mother," he said. Then he shook Henry's hand. "And you'll be a good father, I know you will." The pregnancy went smoothly. though Willow had to cut back on her hours at the store as she got bigger. She spent her time making clothes for the baby, preparing the second bedroom of the house to be a nursery. Henry worked even harder, determined to save every penny he could. He wanted to make sure his family had everything they needed. In February of 1879, on a cold night with snow falling softly outside, Willow went into labor. Henry rode into town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Martha Green, who had delivered half the babies in Lovelock. Samuel Reed insisted on being there too, pacing in the parlor while Martha and Henry stayed with Willow. The labor was long and difficult, and Henry felt helpless, holding Willow's hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth while she screamed in pain. But finally, in the early hours of the morning, they heard a baby's cry. Martha emerged from the bedroom holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. "You have a son," she said, smiling. Henry's legs nearly gave out. A son. He had a son. Martha let him hold the baby, and Henry looked down at the tiny red face, the small hands curling into fists, and felt his heart expand with a love he hadn't known was possible. "Can I see him?" Willow called weakly from the bedroom. Henry carried the baby to her, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. Willow looked exhausted but radiant, her hair damp with sweat, her face glowing with happiness. She took the baby in her arms and gazed down at him with wonder. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I'm your mother." They named him James Samuel Reed James, after both his grandfathers. Henry's father's name had been James, and they wanted to honor Samuel Reed as well. They called him Jamie for short. Samuel Reed held his grandson with surprising tenderness, the hard lines of his face softening as he looked down at the baby. "He has his mother's eyes," he said quietly. Life changed in ways both exhausting and wonderful. Jamie was a fussy baby, waking them up multiple times a night, demanding to be fed and held. But Henry didn't mind. He would walk the floor with his son at 3 in the morning, singing old songs his own father had sung to him, feeling Jamie's small body relax against his chest. Willow was a natural mother, patient and loving even when she was exhausted. They worked together as a team, supporting each other through the difficult early months, and gradually things got easier. Jamie started sleeping through the night. He started smiling and laughing. He grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, happy baby. The ranch continued to grow. Henry's herd was now up to 50 head of cattle, and he had hired another hand to help David. The extra help allowed Henry to spend more time with his family, which was exactly what he wanted. He would come home in the evenings and play with Jamie, tossing him in the air and catching him while the baby shrieked with laughter. On summer evenings, they would sometimes take Jamie and ride out to the old oak tree by the creek. The carving of Willow's name was still there, weathered but visible. They would sit in the shade, watching Jamie crawl around in the grass, and talk about how far they had come since that day when Willow had found her name carved into the tree. "I meant what I said that day," Willow told him one evening. "I had been waiting. I just didn't know what I was waiting for until I met you." "I felt the same way," Henry said, "like my whole life had been leading me to that moment." When Jamie was 2 years old, Willow told Henry she was pregnant again. This time, Henry was more prepared, though no less excited. Their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth Rose, was born in the spring of 1881. She was easier than Jamie had been, a calm baby who slept through the night almost from the start. The ranch continued to prosper. Henry's herd had grown to over 100 head, and he was starting to make a real name for himself in the county. Other ranchers respected him, and he had even been asked to join the local cattlemen's association. The small ranch he and Willow had started was becoming something significant, Samuel Reed retired from running the store in 1882, selling it to a young couple from California. He spent his time instead with his grandchildren, who adored him. The stern man who had once intimidated Henry had become a doting grandfather, always ready with a story or a piece of candy. In 1883, Willow gave birth to their third child, another son they named Thomas. Jamie was now 4 years old, already helping his father with small chores around the ranch, and Elizabeth was a bright, curious 2-year-old who followed her older brother everywhere. Henry sometimes stood on his porch in the evenings, looking out over his land, and marveled at how much his life had changed. He had gone from a lonely cowboy with nothing to his name to a man with a thriving ranch, a beautiful wife, and 3 healthy children. He thought about that day when he had carved Willow's name into the oak tree, how desperate and hopeless he had felt. He had thought it was a futile gesture, but it had been the beginning of everything. The years rolled by, marked by the rhythms of ranch life. There were good years when the cattle thrived and the prices were high. There were hard years when drought came or when winter was particularly brutal. But through it all, Henry and Willow faced everything together. They had built something solid, something that would last. Jamie grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved working with his father on the ranch. Elizabeth was clever and strong-willed, always reading books and asking questions about everything. Thomas was the wild one, always getting into mischief, but with a heart of gold. In 1887, when Jamie was 8, Henry started teaching him how to ride and rope, the same skills that Henry's father had taught him back in Kansas. He remembered those days with his father with a bittersweet nostalgia, wishing his father could have met Willow and the children. But he honored his father's memory by passing on those skills to Jamie, teaching him not just how to work cattle but how to be a good man. Samuel Reed passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1888. He was 70 years old. Henry and Willow mourned him deeply, but they also celebrated the life he had lived. He had been a good man, a devoted father and grandfather, and he had seen his daughter happily settled before he died. At his funeral, Jamie read a passage from the Bible, and Elizabeth sang a hymn in her clear, sweet voice. Even Thomas, only 5 years old, stood quietly, understanding that something important had happened. Reed had left everything to Willow, including his savings and a house in town. She sold the house and put the money into the ranch, allowing them to buy more land and expand their operation even further. By 1890, they had one of the most successful ranches in the region, with over 300 head of cattle and 5 ranch hands working for them. But success didn't change who they were. Henry still worked alongside his hands, getting dirty and tired just like he always had. Willow still kept the books and helped with the cooking and watched over their children. They had worked too hard to get where they were to let pride or wealth change them. In 1891, Willow told Henry she was pregnant for the 4th time. She was 35 now, and the pregnancy was harder on her than the previous ones had been. Henry worried constantly, but Willow remained calm and confident. Their 4th child, a daughter they named Margaret, was born in the spring of 1892. She was the smallest of their children, but also the most determined, with a fierce cry that announced her arrival. Henry was 41 now, and he sometimes felt the aches and pains that came with years of hard work. But he was happy, profoundly happy. He had everything he had ever dreamed of and more. His children were healthy and growing. His wife was the love of his life, as beautiful to him now as she had been that first day he saw her on the porch of her father's store. His ranch was thriving. What more could a man ask for? One summer evening in 1895, when Jamie was 16 and starting to take on more responsibility at the ranch, The whole family rode out to the old oak tree. It had become a tradition, something they did a few times a year. The children loved playing by the creek, and Henry and Willow loved sitting in the shade, watching them. The carving of Willow's name was still there, faint now after 18 years, but still visible if you knew where to look. Henry traced the letters with his finger, remembering that day so long ago when he had stood here alone, full of hope and fear. "What are you thinking about?" Willow asked, sitting beside him. "About how lucky I am," he said. "About how one moment can change everything." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think about that too. What if I hadn't decided to organize the flower that day? What if you hadn't come into the store at that exact moment? What if you hadn't carved my name into this tree?" "I think we would have found each other somehow," Henry said. "Some things are just meant to be." They watched their children playing in the creek, splashing each other and laughing. Jamie was helping little Margaret across some slippery rocks, being careful and protective the way he always was with his younger siblings. Elizabeth was trying to catch fish with her bare hands, determined and focused. Thomas was collecting interesting stones, his pockets already bulging. "We made this," Willow said softly. "All of this. Our family, our home, our life. We made it together." "Best thing I ever did was carve your name into this tree," Henry said. "Second best thing was finding the courage to talk to you. And I've been grateful every day that I found it," Willow said. "That I found you." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, they gathered the children and headed home. The ride back to their ranch was peaceful, with the children tired from playing and Henry and Willow riding side by side, hands occasionally touching. The years continued to pass. Jamie eventually took over most of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, showing the same dedication and work ethic that Henry had always had. Elizabeth married a schoolteacher from Reno and moved to the city, but she visited often with her own children. Thomas became a horse trainer, with a gift for working with difficult animals. Margaret, the youngest, proved to be the most business-minded of all of them, helping to expand their cattle operation into new markets. Henry and Willow grew old together, their hair turning gray, their faces lined with age but also with laughter. They still took walks together in the evenings, still held hands, still found reasons to laugh and love. The passion of their youth had mellowed into something deeper and richer, a love built on decades of shared experiences, of facing life's challenges together, of raising a family and building a legacy. In 1910, when Henry was 60 and Willow was 57, they celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary. The whole family gathered at the ranch, which now sprawled over thousands of acres. Jamie and his wife had given them 6 grandchildren. Elizabeth had 4, Thomas had 3. Margaret was newly married and talking about starting her own family soon. They held a big celebration, with tables set up on the lawn and food enough to feed an army. The grandchildren ran around playing, their laughter filling the air. Henry stood on his porch, looking out at all of it, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Willow came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking?" she asked, the same question she had asked him hundreds of times over the years. "I'm thinking about how that scared kid who carved your name into a tree couldn't have imagined any of this," he said. "I'm thinking about how blessed I've been to share my life with you." "We've been blessed to share our lives with each other," she corrected gently. "This wasn't just you, Henry. We built this together." "I know," he said, "and I wouldn't change a single moment of it." They stood there together, watching their family celebrate, watching the sun set over the land they had worked so hard to build something on. The old oak tree was still standing by the creek, a silent witness to the love story that had begun there so many years ago. The carving was almost invisible now, worn away by time and weather, but it didn't matter. The love it represented had grown far beyond a simple carving in a tree. It had become a family, a legacy, a life fully lived. As the stars began to come out, one by one, Henry pulled Willow close and kissed her, the way he had been kissing her for over 3 decades. She kissed him back, and in that kiss was everything they had been through together, every joy and sorrow, every triumph and challenge. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you too," she whispered back. "Always have, always will." And that, Henry thought, was the truest thing in the world. Their love had started with a carving in a tree and a woman who said she had been waiting. It had grown into something beautiful and lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone, carried on in their children and grandchildren and all the generations to come. That night, after all the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, Henry and Willow lay in bed together, as they had done for over 3 decades. The window was open, letting in the cool night air and the sound of crickets chirping. "You remember the first time I saw the carving?" Willow asked in the darkness. "Every detail," Henry said. "You looked at me like you could see right into my soul." "I could," she said, "and I liked what I saw." They fell asleep holding each other, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and had built something beautiful together. Outside, the Nevada night stretched on forever, the stars brilliant in the clear sky, the land vast and unchanging. And somewhere out there, the old oak tree stood by the creek, its branches spreading wide, a living monument to a love that had changed 2 lives forever. The years went on, and Henry and Willow continued to be active in their ranch and their family. Henry taught his grandsons how to ride and rope, passing on the skills that had been passed down to him. Willow read stories to her granddaughters and taught them how to keep books and manage a household. They were grandparents now, but they were still very much partners, still very much in love. In 1915, when Henry was 65, he finally decided to retire from the active management of the ranch. Jamie had been running things for years anyway, and he had proven himself more than capable. Henry spent his days instead working on smaller projects, tending a garden that Willow had always wanted, and spending time with his grandchildren. Willow retired from keeping the books, turning that responsibility over to Margaret, who had a natural gift for numbers and business. She spent her time instead reading, something she had always loved but never had enough time for. She also started writing down the story of their lives, wanting to preserve it for future generations. She wrote about how they had met, about the carving in the tree, about the early struggles and triumphs of building their ranch. They took a trip back to Kansas in 1918, Henry's first time back since he had left as a teenager. The farm where he had grown up was still there, though it was owned by someone else now. They visited his father's grave, and Henry stood there for a long time, telling his father about his life, about Willow and the children and the ranch. He wished his father could have known the happiness he had found. In 1920, the whole family gathered again for Henry and Willow's 42nd anniversary. They now had 18 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. The ranch had continued to grow and prosper under Jamie's management, and all of their children were doing well in their own lives. At the celebration, Jamie stood up to make a toast. "I want to say something about my parents," he said, his voice strong and clear. "They taught me what love looks like. Not the easy kind of love, but the kind that endures through hardship and challenge, the kind that builds something lasting. Everything we have, everything we are as a family, comes from the foundation they laid." So here's to Henry and Willow James, the best parents anyone could ask for. Everyone raised their glasses, and Henry felt tears prickling his eyes. He looked at Willow and saw that she was crying too, but smiling. "We did good, didn't we?" he whispered to her. "We did better than good," she whispered back. "We did amazing." As they grew older, Henry and Willow's health began to decline, as was natural. Henry developed arthritis in his hands and knees from years of hard work. Willow's eyesight began to fail, making it harder for her to read. But they faced these challenges the same way they had faced everything else, together and with grace. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1928, they were both 75 years old. The celebration was smaller this time, just immediate family, as both Henry and Willow tired more easily now. But it was no less meaningful. They sat in the parlor of the house they had built together 50 years earlier, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and a growing number of great-grandchildren. Jamie presented them with a special gift, something he had been working on for months. It was a photograph of the old oak tree, professionally taken and framed. But more than that, he had commissioned a wood carver to create a replica of the section of bark with Willow's name carved into it, preserving it before time wore it away completely. "So we'll always remember where it all began," Jamie said. Henry took the carving, running his fingers over the letters of Willow's name just as he had done 50 years ago when he first carved them. "Thank you, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This means more than you know." That night, Henry and Willow sat on their porch, wrapped in blankets against the cool December air, looking up at the stars. 50 years, Willow said. "It feels like a lifetime and also like no time at all." "I'd do it all again," Henry said. "Every moment. Even the hard parts," she asked. "Especially the hard parts," he said. "Because we got through them together. That's what made us strong." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just being together. Then Willow said, "Do you remember what I said when I found the carving, when I found my name in the tree?" "You said you had been waiting," Henry replied. "I'm glad I waited," she said. "I'm glad I waited for you." "Me too," Henry said, taking her hand. "Me too." Henry passed away peacefully in his sleep on a spring morning in 1931. He was 78 years old. He had been working in the garden the day before, planting tomatoes, and had seemed in good spirits. But that night, he simply didn't wake up. Willow was lying beside him when she realized he was gone, and though she grieved, she also felt a strange sense of peace. He had lived a good life, a full life, and he had died quietly, without pain or suffering. The funeral was enormous, with people coming from all over the county to pay their respects. Henry James had been a respected rancher, a good employer, a devoted husband and father. The church couldn't hold everyone who wanted to attend, so they held the service outside, under the open sky that Henry had loved so much. Jamie gave the eulogy, speaking about his father's life, his character, his legacy. "My father taught me that success isn't measured in money or land," he said. "It's measured in the lives you touch, the love you give, the family you build. By that measure, he was the most successful man I've ever known." They buried Henry on a hill overlooking the ranch with a simple headstone that read, "Henry James, 1853–1931. Beloved husband, father, and friend. He lived with honor and died with peace." Willow lived for another 5 years after Henry's death. She spent her time with her family, telling stories about Henry to the younger grandchildren and great-grandchildren who hadn't known him as well. She finished writing the story of their lives together, completing a manuscript that would be passed down through the generations. She visited Henry's grave every day, sitting beside it and talking to him, telling him about the family, about the ranch, about the world that kept changing without him. She missed him terribly, felt like a part of herself had been torn away, but she also felt grateful. They had had 53 years together, which was more than many people ever got. On a summer day in 1936, Willow asked Jamie to take her to the old oak tree by the creek. She was 83 years old now, frail and tired, but determined. Jamie helped her onto the wagon and they made the journey slowly, taking their time. When they reached the tree, Jamie helped her down and she stood there, one hand on the massive trunk, looking up at the branches spreading overhead. The carving of her name was completely worn away now, invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. But Willow knew. She pressed her palm against the spot, feeling the rough bark, remembering the day she had found it, remembering the look on Henry's face when she had said she had been waiting. "This is where it all began," she told Jamie. "This is where your father told me he loved me without words. And this is where I told him I felt the same way." "It's a special place," Jamie said gently. "It is," Willow agreed. "And I want to be buried here when my time comes, with your father looking down from the hill and this tree standing watch. Will you make sure that happens?" "Of course, Mother," Jamie said, his voice catching. "Whatever you want." Willow passed away peacefully in her sleep just 3 days later. She was 83 years old. The family believed she had been waiting, just holding on, until she could visit the oak tree one last time. They honored her wishes and buried her at the base of the tree with a simple headstone that read, Willow Reed James, 1853–1936. Beloved wife, mother, and friend, she waited and she was found. At the funeral, Elizabeth read from the manuscript her mother had written, the story of how Henry had carved Willow's name into the tree, how she had found it and said she had been waiting, how that moment had been the beginning of a love that lasted a lifetime. There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. The old oak tree became a family landmark, a place where the descendants of Henry and Willow James would come to remember their ancestors and the love story that had started it all. The ranch continued to thrive under Jamie's management and eventually passed down to his children and grandchildren. Over the years, members of the family would sometimes carve their own names into the tree, continuing the tradition that Henry had started. But they always left space around where Willow's name had been, that faded carving that had started everything, treating it as sacred ground. The story of Henry and Willow became a family legend, passed down through generations. Great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren would hear about the cowboy who had been too shy to speak his feelings, so he carved them into a tree instead. They heard about the woman who found the carving and said she had been waiting, knowing in that moment that she had found something special. They heard about how two people had built a life together from nothing, creating a legacy that would last for generations. The ranch remained in the family, growing and changing with the times but never losing sight of the values that Henry and Willow had instilled. Hard work, honesty, dedication, and above all, love. Love for the land, love for family, love for each other. And through it all, the old oak tree stood by the creek, its branches spreading wide, a silent witness to a love story that had begun there over 150 years ago. The carving was long gone, worn away by time and weather. But the love it represented lived on, carried forward in the hearts and lives of all the people who came after. All the descendants of a cowboy who carved a name into a tree, and a woman who said she had been waiting. Their story became a testament to the power of love, to the courage it takes to be vulnerable, to the strength that comes from facing life's challenges together. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures can have the biggest impact, that a moment of bravery can change everything, and that true love, when nurtured and protected, can create something that lasts forever. The James family ranch is still there today, still thriving, still carrying on the legacy that Henry and Willow built together. And on quiet summer evenings, when the descendants of Henry and Willow gather at the old oak tree by the creek, they swear they can still feel the presence of their ancestors, still feel the love that started it all, as strong and enduring as the tree itself. Henry and Willow's story reminds us all that love is worth fighting for, worth believing in, worth carving into a tree for all the world to see. It reminds us that the best things in life are built slowly, with patience and dedication. It reminds us that two people, starting with nothing but hope and love, can create something truly extraordinary. And so the story ends where it began, at the old oak tree by the creek, where a young cowboy once carved a name, and where a young woman found it and said the words that would change both their lives forever. "I've been waiting." Those three simple words became the foundation of a love that lasted a lifetime, a family that spanned generations, and a legacy that will endure as long as the old oak tree stands watch over the land they loved. Henry James and Willow Reed James lived and loved and left behind something beautiful. Their story is one of courage and hope, of patience and perseverance, of a love that conquered all obstacles and built something lasting. It's a story that deserves to be remembered, to be passed down, to inspire others to believe in the power of love. And as long as there are descendants of Henry and Willow James walking the earth, as long as the old oak tree stands by the creek, their story will never be forgotten. They had found each other, built a life together, raised a family, and created a legacy that would echo through time. And it all started with a carving in a tree, and a woman who said she had been waiting.